If you didn't know, almost everything, and I mean everything, in Genshin Impact stems from a long line of inspirations based on popular folklore and mythologies in their given nation, from names like Xiao, Scaramouche, and Albedo to entire character concepts and even music. Genshin takes pride in using real-life inspirations and mythologies for its work to expand its own mythos in relation to that. And today, I've taken it upon myself to dive deep into Genshin mythology and connect it with its real-life counterparts, and make a slight summary for you guys in case you want to start off with Genshin's very rich history. Disclaimer: this video is just meant to analyze direct named references that were in the game with potential source materials, rather than theorizing on new ones. My goal here is to learn about how Genshin adapted these into its fantasy world, then zero in on the stories they're about. But much like any adaptation or inspiration in modern media, it's important to note that Hoyoverse has taken significant creative liberties, and most of the time, it's not 1:1. So let's begin. What is Celestia? Celestia is the backbone of all Genshin mythologies, from the gods to how Teyvat itself was created to even how certain calamities have affected everyone. Celestia, in its simplicity, is the island in the sky. It's been shown just floating around there and continues to be one of the more unexplained realms in Genshin despite its 4 years of existence. If you didn't know, Genshin's world, the physical realm, as we know it, existed before Celestia came. In the old world, there were 7 strong elemental dragons known as the 7 Sovereigns, who ruled over the land until the primordial one known as Phanis showed up and bested them in battle. It's not completely confirmed why Phanis came to this world and immediately decided that they were going to colonize it, but this is the moment where Celestia overtook the previous rule of the land. From Phanis spawned 4 different shades which were theorized to correspond to the artifacts: life, death, Eon, Eonothum, and Logos, with the shades of death and Eon being alluded to as Thrunove and Istaroth. The 4 shades in Phanis created everything in the known Teyvat, like life, animals, and even the actual deities that we know of. But they were also responsible for overseeing what happened with humanity. For example, they watched over humanity when people became too ambitious or went against their divine will, even going as far as to remove entire civilizations either out of purification because of humanity's misguided exploration or anger for disobedience. Celestia's gods are absolute and unmoving. They're perceived as principles and are the complete law of the land. When vision wielders die, they are supposed to ascend to Celestia, and whatever happens to them is currently unknown. Genshin existing myths, as far as we are aware as viewers, are almost all connected to Celestia, from the sustainer of heavenly principles that we saw in the opening to the archons and their mysterious origins, to even a lot of the monsters and people that we fight. Celestia is the center of Genshin mythos. So, what is it inspired from? Celestia's portrayal in Genshin Impact stems from multiple cosmogonies and religious ideas that are meant to answer one question: how was the world created? Later on in the video, you'll see how most of the mythologies here center around creation myths and beings who are responsible for helping or hindering humanity. Strangely enough, the inspiration used is much more human-centric mythologies as opposed to more folklore or deity-centric mythologies like Greek and Norse. Human-centric mythologies are usually about external creatures, summons, or entities that shape the world in which humanity walks in, and are responsible for testing humanity as natural forces instead of being their own character, which is in line with Genshin's themes. Celestia has 3 main source materials that it derives most of its key concepts from. Number 1 is Gnosticism, which is where the word gnosis comes from, so go figure, right? This was a collection of religious ideas that stemmed from the concept that there was a hidden god and a lesser deity that was responsible for creating the material universe. Gnosticism also purports the idea that salvation is gained through the direct knowledge of enlightenment, and that we as mortals need to see beyond the illusion of the material world. In Genshin, this matches the themes of having visions and ambitions and the idea of questioning beyond our existence. It also puts into perspective how gods like Venti and Zhongli have to answer to some unknown higher power either out of fear or obligation. And even better is that when vision wielders die, they ascend. Second is the Lesser Key of Solomon, which was defined as a series of witchcraft and sorcery that implies to summon and cover supernatural entities in order to aid a summoner. While Genshin mostly uses its demonology counterpart, aka the Ars Goetia, it's still important to note that Goetic sorcery can also include angels and spirits. Certain characters like Mona has references to this concept, like the Trismegistus. But in terms of Celestia, the Goetic grimoire Ars Goetia is the main source for the god names. The Ars Goetia is the only one so far that I think Genshin has used, but surprisingly, there are more books in the series. Fun fact, the Ars Goetia came from the Lesser Key of Solomon, and there are other books in that compendium, something known as the Ars Theurgia Goetia, Ars Paulina, Ars Almadel, and Ars Notoria. Actually, it's only the first two books that talk about demonology. In Ars Paulina, you start getting the angels. But Genshin actually reevaluates most depictions of the Ars Goetia, because the Ars Goetia isn't just about demons, but rather about conjuration. It's summoning creatures that are meant to help you, much like how the archons are supposed to help humanity. Then third is angelology, which states that there exists a hierarchy in heaven and has been present in the imagery of the divine as being mythical. But the archons and Celestia have also referenced other mythologies, such as Norse, Chinese mythology, Hinduism, Orphic, and even biblical cosmogony to some extent. This is going to be evident later when we start breaking down the origins. Now, going back to Gnosticism, because that's the main bread and butter of most things Celestia. In a nutshell, the Gnostic idea of creation is that everything came from a single source: life, knowledge, and even energy as we know it. The Gnostic cosmology states that there was once a distant supreme ruler known as the Monad, and from it came the Aeons. From those aeons emerged the Demiurge, which was an artisan-like figure that created the physical universe, but was antagonistic to the will of the Supreme Being. Then, in other variations, the Demiurge had servants known as the Archons, who were responsible in overseeing the testing of humanity by placing upon them great suffering and pain. Humanity's salvation then comes from them understanding the emanation of God and transcending the material. Because of the Demiurge's intervention, the complete totality of divine knowledge and power has been split and trapped amongst humanity. Only with enlightenment can these lost knowledge and origins be returned back to whence it came, and humanity will be able to achieve gnosis and return to the realm above known as Pleroma. So just based on this rough summary, you can kind of understand what Genshin was going for when it came to mortals getting power, and that seat in heaven is not for you. Mortals have visions which were given by the deity with respective authority, but had a price to pay that they weren't completely aware of. All we know is that the god that gave it received something in return, so it isn't completely a gift, but an investment. Next is that there is a primordial god somewhere that was responsible for creating the universe, and there's potentially a lesser god that's overseeing everything while the big god is absent. The archons are also subservient to the lesser god, and that lesser god isn't exactly as friendly to humanity. Humans with potential are also told to hone that in order to achieve ascension, and to potentially ascend into a higher realm, for better or for worse. Let's hope that Genshin adapted the good ending of that mythology. Now we move on to the named concepts, and let's see what we can find out more about them. This part is going to be more specific to the context of the actual word rather than how it interplays with in-universe lore. And with that, let's start off with Phanes, or the alleged creator of humanity alongside their four shades. In Genshin, we get lore in Enkanomiya that the primordial one is named Phanes, which was derived from Orphic cosmogony. Phanes, or Protagonos, is a primeval entity that was born from the cosmic egg. Phanes is an androgynous deity of light and goodness, and upon him all the immortals grew. Phanes had a helmet on his head and an obscure serpent around his body, with the latter missing in Genshin Phanes' description, which means that the serpent could play a bigger role in future content. After all, there are direct mentions of the word Ouroboros in Enkanomiya too, but we'll save that for another time. The four shades that they created to help them defeat the seven sovereigns and assist them in creating the rest of the world are named loosely from the Ars Goetia. The Shade of Time Istaroth is a play on the Goetic demon Astaroth, who was able to teach sciences and crafts and make men invisible and lead them to hidden treasures. The Shade of Death Ronove, on the other hand, is described as a taker of souls, coming to Earth to harvest decrepit humans and animals near death. Fun fact! There used to be a debate before if the four shades were actually connected to Celestia and the Archons, or if they were a different faction altogether. People were theorizing that Celestia usurped the four shades in Phanes, but the current position of, well, everything in Genshin mythos is that they're one and the same. The strongest consideration of this is the consistency of Archon names between the archons and the Four Shades, but also the illusion that some of the archons were directly helped by them, particularly Venti and Makoto's relationship to Istaroth, the Shade of Time. And speaking of peculiar things in Genshin's lore, there's a possibility that Hoyo was playing with the idea of multiple worlds. This is canon to certain characters being able to allegedly travel from them, like Aether, Lumine, and Alice, but Venti actually also references other creation myths. When Venti answered the question of, does entering Celestia make you a god? Venti answers vaguely about 3 gods that were sacrificed in order to create the world. He also mentions that their sacrifices seeded life in the unliving cosmos. These songs sing of the primeval ones. Pangu is a creation figure in Chinese mythology and Taoism who separated his body to form the river and seas. And similar to Phanes, Pangu also emerged from the cosmic egg. In the beginning of the formless, primordial state of the universe, existence coalesced into a cosmic egg from which Pangu came out of. After 18,000 years, however, Pangu died, and all of his bodily features became the elements of the world. His breath the wind, the void thunder, the sun and moon his eyes, and many more. The second god Venti mentions is Purusha. Purusha is the primal human who separated itself into a man and woman, but its more accurate nature is that it is the universal spirit present everywhere, and in everyone from which humanity and all life forms come from. Next is Ymir, or Ogrelmir, or Brumir, from the Poetic Edda and Prose Edda. Ymir was considered a primeval being who lived in the void known as Ginnungagap. From Ymir's flesh was how the world was created. From his blood the ocean, and the brains his clouds. The grandsons of Buri were the ones that actually killed him, Odin, Vili, and Ve. This could mean that there exists worlds out there in the universe that are directly created by higher beings that aren't Celestia, and even more possible is that Celestia, as aliens, answers to a higher being than the primordial one, which is actually pretty cool. This means that there's an entire plethora of gods up there that are just creating or I guess colonizing random worlds. It's also important to note that we're not sure what changed throughout Genshin's development, but I don't think discrediting Venti here is the right call either. These myths allude to the death of the gods as a means of returning back into the world, which is pretty similar to how Phanes also technically perished in mythology. Greek mythology had a history of deicide and war amongst gods, which resulted in transitions from the Titan Age to the Olympian Age. Phanes, and most primordial entities at the time, disappeared from the mythos slowly but surely, being referenced instead by the other gods. Now, Phanes perished allegedly at the hands of Zeus, who ate him and absorbed his power to give to the Olympian gods. To what extent Genshin references this transition from one primordial entity eating another god and transferring power to a new generation is up for you to decide. Now, continuing with the cosmogony of Genshin, mythos dictates the following. The sky of Tivat is actually fake, and it was closed off by Phanes through the eggshell that they came out of. Phanes, the primordial one, used the eggshell to separate the universe and the microcosm of the world. This has been a concept in Genshin for years, and theorists state that Scaramouche's claim that the sky was fake is because there exists a reality beyond Tivat's skies, and that the stars that we see are actually the constellations of the characters, and that the single moon that we see in Genshin is fake. It's also hypothesized that whatever is out there is trying to get into the universe of Tivat, similar to how Phanes came and took over the land, which is why the Sustainer of Heavenly Principles was very, very adamant in separating the two siblings. Alice, Klee's mother and known otherworldly traveler, is keeping track of the fact that Tivat's borders are getting more fragile within the past 2 years. I won't be giving any spoilers to cutscenes of certain Archon quests because people might not have done it yet. Anyway, the border of Tivat is known as the firmament. Now, the word firmament comes from the plurality of cosmological beliefs in the ancient Near East, including, but not limited to, Mesopotamian, Egyptian, early Greek, and Islamic cosmology. The firmament itself is known as a solid dome created by God during the Genesis, and you have to remember that this idea comes from the flat world interpretation, which is why we have theories about Tivat being flat. Anyway, the firmament itself is meant to separate the material world from the chambers of heaven, and it's also to separate the primal sea so that the ground can appear. I wonder where else we know about the primordial sea. Anyway, the gap between the heaven and earth is allegedly still made out of water, and allows passage of heavenly bodies because this is where the doors leading to the heavens are located. According to Wright in his book In the Early History of Heaven, ascent to the celestial realm can also be done by a celestial ladder made by the gods. This last passage could be a reference to how, according to the Adventurer Handbook and map description of the Spiral Abyss, rumor has it that the people who ascended to Celestia also witnessed the same helix-shaped divine ladder that can be seen in visions. Neat! Going back to Genshin, I also want to focus on Fanas themselves being known as a throne. Now, Genshin has used the word throne in two contexts. First, to refer to them as a kind of creature category. The primordial one was the first throne, and the second descender was a second throne. However, thrones used as seats and chairs are also commonplace. For example, the 7 divine thrones representing the O-based elements like Animo, Geo, and the like have been scattered around the stories. That there are 7 seats in Celestia that correspond to the authority of the archons during the war. Now, thrones, or Ophanim or Galgalin, are angels who are responsible for ensuring the stability of God's throne in the midst of the cosmic chaos. They are characterized by peace and submission, and God rests upon them. Thrones are depicted as great wheels containing many eyes and reside in the area of the cosmos where material form begins to take shape. They chant glorious to God and remain forever in His presence, and they mete out divine justice and maintain the cosmic harmony of all universal laws, which makes a lot of sense if you consider what Celestia's role in the entirety of Genshin's cosmogony is. So now that I've started off with the premise of Genshin's cosmogony, I think we should focus on the characters that we personally know. The Archons are Genshin's mascot deities, and while it's nice to theorize about Celestia, it's with them that we spend the most time with and money on. But where did the word Archon come from? The word Archon comes from Gnosticism and are supposedly servants of the Demiurge. The world-creating Archons are somewhat semi-hostile to humanity, but it's simply in their nature to be rejecting the governmental system imposed on them by the supreme gods, which could explain why almost all of the Archons that we have are literally pissed at whatever Celestia is doing, and or scared. The Archons are also somewhat demonic in nature because they oversee the material world and test humanity, which fits if you remember that all of the gods here in Genshin are named after demons. The Archons in Gnosticism supposedly rule over 7 celestial spheres, and as you guessed it, there are 7 of them. But here's something stranger, because Novelet says that the 7 overseers of the material realm were duty-bound to grant them a gift, aka a vision. According to the lore, to receive a vision is to sell oneself to the fate of this world, to Heimermene, and to evermore lose the chance to walk the correct path. And I found something cool in my research that connected Heimermene to the Archons, because I first thought that Heimermene was just a separate concept altogether. Heimermene, in general, is an ancient Greek goddess and being of fate, but according to Hans 1958, the tyrannical world rule is called Heimermene, or the universal fate which aims at the enslavement of man. As guardian of his sphere, each Archon bars the passage to the souls that seek to ascend after death, in order to prevent their escape from the world and their return to God. So take that information what you will about the integrity of receiving a vision. And with that, that's it for me today. A bit of a summary because I want to dive deeper into the real-life inspirations of Genshin, and there is a lot of them. So I want to take this a little slower. And Celestia is just massive, so this is probably part 1 of a very, very long comeback of yours truly into Genshin mythology yet again. But anyway, my name is Aster, and thank you for chilling with me. Bye-bye!